Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. Last week we did C, C sharp, and D. Those are 6 pairs of preludes and fugues. Today we're going to do E flat, E, and F, majors and minors. So that's again another 6 pair. This is the entire size of Bach's keyboard, the 4 octaves from C to C. And all of that fantastic music fits in these little 4 octaves. We're going to start today with the E major prelude and fugue as a good morning, wake up, here we are one more time. E major is such a wonderful, bright, joyful key, and I thought this was a great way to start today. I sent you a list of words, of vocabulary words to deal with counterpoint and fugue, and I think to get more out of this, we should go over that vocabulary list, the glossary of contrapuntal terms, and I will demonstrate each one of them from a fugue. Okay, but first, a few thoughts about this whole process. Thank you for signing up for this. This is not an easy course, especially if you're not a keyboard player. These pieces are hard for pianists, they're hard for everybody. And fugues are especially difficult. The 18th century fugue was basically a keyboard piece. It could be of any kind of design. It could be an aria, it could be a chorale prelude, it could be a dance or concerto type form. But in these fugues, these multi-movement fugues, it was one person playing at a keyboard, probably for themselves. These were not intended for performance, therefore the improvement of youth and the diversion of accomplished musicians, the diversion and improvement. Only the performer at the keyboard is in a position to really appreciate the movement of the voices. And the voices can be 2, 3, 4, or 5. Their blending, their separation, their interaction, and their contrasts. A fugue of Bach can be fully understood only by the one who plays it, not only heard, but felt through the muscles and the nerves. It's essentially a private exercise. And the instrument is a private instrument at home, a harpsichord, a clavichord, a little organ, or now a piano. So thank you for coming on this journey with me. Another analogy I got from John Elliott Gardner was that studying these fugues is like being in a little boat on the water. Say you're in Hawaii and you're in a very small boat and you look down at this beautiful water and it's not perfectly clear. You can discern that there are forms down there, and once in a while you see something move, but you don't know what you're looking at. But it's beautiful, and you just let the whole scene wash over you, the water and the air and the perfume of the plumeria and all the senses. Compare that experience to then getting in the water and putting on a mask. Now you're going to snorkel. You are going to go down 10 feet and look at everything up close. You're going to see the fish and the corals and the vegetation and everything up close. And that's what I'm trying to do with you, is put the mask on and come down with me, come under the surface and look, and let's see what we can figure out about structure and color and design down there. So to do that, let's go through your list. Counterpoint, the art of writing melody against melody. Okay. And this evolved from Renaissance vocal traditions. And what Bach does is the most amazing thing. He takes the horizontal flow, okay? You have a horizontal flow of different voices interacting, but he makes them line up vertically into incredibly beautiful harmony. And all this is within some kind of structural rhythmic framework. So it is a supreme art. A fugue is a contrapuntal piece in 2 or more voices where there's a subject, and you hear the entire fugue subject, like here's our main idea. It makes an entry, and then it shows up in another voice, maybe a higher voice, and then again in a lower voice, depending if it's 3 or 4 entries. So you hear these separate entries, and then he plays with it, and he combines them, and they may only be a fraction, a fragment of the fugue subject, and there's filler companion material that can accompany it. And for relief, there's episodes where there's something different. It may be related, it may not be related. So there's a sense of always returning to the theme. The theme is developed, it's turned inside out and upside down, and then you go away and then you come back and look at it again. And of course, you're also modulating through all different keys at the same time. Fugue, subject, counter subject, the companion material. Let's see, and this, the one I just played for you, the fugue subject, that's it. The little, I'm here, and then the rising scale. And then right away, the second voice, and okay. Then all these little scales, that becomes the counter subject, the companion material, and they just go on and on and on, running on, running on. Okay. Inversion would be upside down. So instead of it would be like that. You have to invert it, turn the thing upside down. And then he has great fun. He does the inversion against right side up against upside down, or all upside down in different voices, or different combinations of manipulating this material. Sometimes you see fugue analyses online. I sent the one for the C minor fugue, and they start to look like Lego because they use primary colors and they do a horizontal graph. And so they'll do like bright red is the subject and yellow is the counter subject, and blue is the episode, and you see all these blocks, red, blue, yellow, that, and you get the idea that it's Lego, but it's, think of Lego that's made out of Jello. they're not they're not rigid blocks. Everything can be manipulated, everything can be changed, it can be transposed, the intervals can change, the time duration of the intervals can change. So augmentation and diminution, big ideas. Augmentation means you slow down the subject by doubling usually the note values. And the one I will play for you today in E flat major has a spectacular augmentation in the prelude. Well, see, none of these are the same. None of these fugues are the same. There's no such thing as a typical fugue because they're all different. Every single one is different. So here's the theme from the E flat major prelude. It's like a chorale theme, and he presents that first as a chorale, and then it comes in. And against it, he puts a counter subject, which is derived from another area in the piece. So you have a running 16th notes against this slow theme. And then he does the most amazing thing later in the piece. He takes the theme and stretches it out so that it's in augmentation. It's long note values. E flat minor. Here's the theme of the fugue, rising fifth, and then slow descent, rises back up again, and then falls all the way back. It's so beautiful, and it's so full of resignation and sadness. And what he does is later he brings it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And as he's doing it twice as slowly, in other voices, he's doing it at the normal speed plus 1.5 speed, which is just mind-boggling how he can make all this fit together and harmonically make it so beautiful and so sweet. Here's a perfect place. Here's the augmentation in the soprano. It takes a long time. And then he modulates, okay. In the alto voice, it's at 1.5 speed. He's changed the rhythm to a dada rhythm. And of course, in the lower voice, it's going along. Going along twice as fast. So he's juggling the 3 speeds of the theme and making it work both horizontally and vertically. And that is the genius. That is the genius of Bach. Diminution means you speed it up, right? So it's just the opposite thing. You take long values and make them short so that it goes twice as fast. Retrograde means backwards, and retrograde inversion, backwards and upside down. And there are no canons in the well-tempered clavier. We're all fugues because when the subject comes in again, it's not exactly the same subject starting on the same note. It's always on a different note, and it will modulate or it will be modified in some way. Let's look at a few pictures just to review some of the things I talked about last week. I talked about how these famous pianists were just born and bred and steeped in the well-tempered clavier. Wojciech Zwinyi was Chopin's first piano teacher. He was not a pianist. He was basically a violinist who taught piano as a side gig because he didn't have enough violin students. So what did he do? He gave Chopin, from the age of 6, the well-tempered clavier. Well, Chopin learned the entire book one of the Well-Tempered Clavier by the time he was 9. There's Chopin. This was the year he wrote his preludes when he went to Mallorca with Georges Sand. And the only piece of printed music he took with him was the Well-Tempered Clavier. And so we talked about some similarities I had discovered between his preludes and Bach's preludes last time. 1838, very important date. Next one that's his student's edition of the Well-Tempered Clavier, the C-sharp major prelude, with his markings. And you can buy a facsimile copy of this for $20 from a publisher in Paris. They're publishing facsimiles now, and it's so interesting. It's full of dynamics. First of all, there's a piano in the first bar, crescendo, and there's fingering here and there, few fingerings, forte, diminuendo, crescendo, and he gives a tempo marking as well, 92, which is shockingly fast. I'll just show you. I thought those French pianos are very, very light in the action. So for him, maybe it was easier. I mean, that would be really hard on my Busendorfer, but here's his tempo. So it's to the bar. That's his tempo. I find just a little on the fast side. Okay, but if you're wanting a facsimile of Chopin's markings in the Well-Tempered Clavier, you can buy this from the Paris edition. There's Bach's Prelude in C and Chopin's Prelude in C, which I played for you last week. Okay, we'll just move on. That's a Liszt at the age of 11 had been steeped in the Well-Tempered Clavier by his teacher, Czerny, who had been a student of Beethoven. And later in life, he composed a huge fantasy and fugue on the name Bach. And remember, Bach is a musical motif. In German, the note B natural, they call H. The note B flat, they call B flat. But so if you spell Bach in German musicological do re mi's, you get B flat, A, C, and then the H is the B natural. So Liszt did this huge extravaganza and for organ, and then he did it again. He reorganized it for solo piano as well. So amazing. And he had learned all of Book One by the age of 11 when he went to play for Beethoven. And his teacher, Neefe was a court organist in Bonn. Beethoven was taken to him as a little boy. And again, what was he given? As soon as he learned to read, the Well-Tempered Clavier, all of it. So again, about the same age, 8, 9, 10 years old, these guys were steeped in it. And then they taught it to their students. And Czerny later made an edition with terrible recommendations for tempos and dynamics, which is now considered one of the worst editions historically of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And Beethoven's great quote that not Bach, sondern Meer sollte heißen. We should call him ocean, not a stream, not a brook. Bach means brook. The main musical competition for him at the time was Telemann and Buxtehude, and they all seem to sometimes apply for the same jobs. And when Bach went to Leipzig, they really wanted Telemann, but he turned it down. And Telemann and Handel showed up there was an organist job. And one of the caveats was that, okay, if you accepted this position, you had to marry the organist's daughter, who was an ancient, 30 years old at that time. So they all ran away and didn't take it. But they were considered, the most attractive, the most popular composers. Telemann especially was. And to me, now this music, it sounds so dumbed down, simple, watery. It's just simple. It's like easy listening music. It doesn't modulate. It doesn't use contrapuntal devices. It doesn't surprise you with rhythmic interest. Here's an aria. This is by Telemann. this was great stuff. It's beyond me. Here's his chorale prelude on Vater unser in Himmelreich, our Father in Heaven. It doesn't get more interesting than that. That's it. Buxtehude, who Bach, walked 130 miles to go listen to. He was the big star organist of the day. Huge reputation. When Bach went to see him, he was already an old man. He was 70, and he had been in his job for many, many years. Here's his toccata in G. It just sounds like endless noodling on the tonic in G major. I mean, there's this one secondary dominant. It's so boring. But if you have a big pipe organ and you can make a lot of noise and you can register contrast, right? You could make this sound impressive, going fast and brilliantly on lots of registers. But musically, you're going nowhere. It's like you're spinning your wheels in the sand, not going anywhere. Okay, so now let's put those guys away. Back to Bach. Bach can't go 2 measures without going somewhere and saying something important. Let's do the little E minor prelude and fugue. E minor prelude and fugue. The first half of this prelude was in the Wilhelm Friedemann notebook, but it just stops in measure 22. It just ends on a cadence. Bach, when he did the well-tempered clavier, extended it with this marvelous presto. The first part is this endless. It's like this wave underneath, and then an ornamented aria on top. It could be a violin solo. It sounds like very likely an ornamented violin solo would be. And then this thing in the bass becomes the main motif in the presto to the end. So it completely changes character. It's this bipolar prelude. Very exciting. So first the aria, the lento, E minor. personality, just huge, huge musical personality and ideas. The little fugue that follows is the only one in two voices in book one of the Well-Tempered Clavier. It's more of a two-part invention. There's just a simple subject, and it imitated, answered in the other hand, and they kind of go at it. They have an argument about tearing this little subject apart. It's very energetic. It's very simple for Bach. It was great fun and endless harmonic complexity there. Beautiful, beautiful harmonic complexity. Okay, now let's go to E flat. The E flat major prelude and fugue and the E flat minor prelude and fugues are huge. They are monumental. They're the seventh in the series of going up 1, 2, 3, 4, going up the 12, 24 keys, major, minor, major, minor. It's number 7. Number 7 is a significant number in Bach's numerology because it refers to, the creator, the spirit, the Holy Spirit, the prime power behind everything, number 7. So the fact that he put it 7, and then also E flat major has 3 flats. So this becomes symbolic of the Trinity. So E3 flats, it's 7th in position. The prelude is in 3 sections. There's an opening section that's kind of a preamble. It sounds a bit improvisatory. And then that, after 9 measures, which is 3 times 3, turns into a chorale, which is in old Renaissance style, very slow moving 4 parts. And you can't tell where the bar lines are because it's just about the horizontal movements of these voices sliding against each other. And that theme is what will become the fugue theme. This is a double fugue. He writes a double fugue in a prelude. This is also the only one. See, none of these are alike. They're all different. So this one starts with a preamble, improvisatory 9 measures, and then 15 measures of the stile antico, kind of Renaissance polyphony in 4 voices. He's doing the numerology thing again. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 5 is 15. And 5 is a sacred number. That's the number of the wounds of Christ. And so he cadences that, and then he goes into the double fugue where he combines the opening idea of the preamble, which is those little scale rising and then up, and then this chorale, which is awfully reminiscent of Passion Chorale. So there's lots of associations here. The entire piece is 70 measures long, and 70 is, again, for him, it's 14 times 5. 14. And you remember what's significant about 14? You can remember because our course was on page 14 of the catalog. 14 is Bach's numerology thumbprint. If you put B-A-C-H in the alphabet, B is 2, A is 1, C is 3, and the H is 8. That adds up to 14. So here's another instance, maybe, of the 14 playing a role. I wouldn't put it past him because no one can figure out everything that Bach was doing. I mean, I feel like the difference between a dog and a human. I feel like the dog compared to Bach. Okay, so we have this amazing prelude in 3 sections, the Trinity, the 3 flats, everything's in multiples of 3s. And then the fugue is this joyful, bright, in 3 voices, of course, E flat major, 3 voices, but it loses all the seriousness and it's just jubilant joy, lively life energy. So, okay, let's try. This is a long one. This is about 5 minutes just for the prelude. It's one of the biggest ones in the book one. amazing, that final cadence. It sounds so jazzy after it finishes. And this is an endless well of the study of harmony for composers and lovers of music alike. It's part of the reason that Chopin and Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms and everybody so adored these pieces. They're just endlessly fascinating. Okay, now back to some more life of Bach stories. Let's look at the employment history list. I made the list with the cities and the dates. And what you see is constant moving. I mean, the life of an itinerant musician was not easy. Those first jobs, his first Weimar job, he was only there for 6 months, and he was mostly playing violin in a court orchestra. He did not have a university education, unlike Telemann and Buxtehude and others who had enough money to go to university. Bach did not. So he always felt like he was playing catch up, and he had to be self-educated, and that he didn't have an advantage when he came to apply for a job because he had no university degree, even in those days. So the first Weimar job, 6 months, and then he went to Arnstadt, which is where he first won his job as an organist. There was a brand new organ that had just been repaired or installed by a friend of his he knew, and they asked him to come try it out and test it, make sure everything worked. And he had apprenticed to an organ maker, so he knew exactly everything, how everything worked, and he did it. And they were so impressed with both his technical knowledge and his playing that they immediately offered him the job. He said, this is nice. This is, I'm the music director in a small town. I'm basically at the top of the totem pole in this small town of services. And yeah, there's a school and I can make the best of that. I'll be my own boss. No, there was a church council and a town council who supervised. And this is a small provincial German town. So what they have, they paid him a good starting salary, and he was also paid in firewood and barley and beer. It's a single guy, right? It's his first job, but he has no musicians to work with. There's no core of instrumental musicians like university students or town professional orchestra, and there's a choir school, but the boys are hopeless. So even though this is a larger town in the area, the resources are pretty terrible. And then he gets into trouble. He has a fight with a bassoonist in his orchestra because he insulted him and called him a zippelfagotist, which basically was calling him a prick in front of the whole orchestra. And so days went by, and this guy planned his revenge. So late one night, after the bassoonist and his cronies have been drinking for a while in a tavern, Bach is coming across the town square with a female cousin of his, not his future wife, just another relative. And they confront him and they say, apologize or else. And this guy, his name is Johann Geiersbach, he was armed with a stick. And by stick, we don't mean stick, we mean one of these. And he threatened Bach with it, and he actually hit him in the face. Bach was also armed. The civilian sidearm of that day was a short sword. They call it a hunting sword. And I have a picture of that later for you. But just so you know, this horrible confrontation, the friends had to pull them apart. Basically, the bassoonist's friends pulled them apart to prevent Bach from injuring him in a serious way. And so then they both went and complained. The bassoonist said that he'd been attacked and insulted, and Bach needed to apologize. And this was the kind of thing you could be fined and put in jail for. And then Bach said, no, this guy started it. And besides, he can't play and he's useless and he's a bully. He's slightly older. How am I supposed to work under these conditions? And the town council and the church council got together and said, now, boys, you have to get along. We have to be grown-ups here. Everybody has to get along. So neither one of them had satisfaction. And Bach was furious. He says, you're not paying me enough to put up with this stuff. So after they didn't support him, this was in October. It took weeks for the trial and the delays, and then they asked for witnesses, and Bach's cousin said, yes, I'll come and I'll verify what he said is correct. And she showed up, and neither the mayor nor the head of the church council was there. Just nobody was there. So, besides, she was only a woman. So what value was her testimony? So then Bach is really annoyed and offended. So he deputizes a cousin to substitute for him at the church job for 4 weeks. So the cousin thinks, okay, this is going to be November, right? And then Bach will be back for Advent and Christmas. No. Bach applied for 4 weeks vacation and then left for 4 months. And this is when he supposedly walked to Lübeck to hear Buxtehude. Buxtehude had a very spectacular series of evening concerts with instrumental music and organ music and singers and the church services. And Buxtehude was the most celebrated organist of the day. So Bach just stayed and missed Christmas and didn't come back until February, at which time they had some words. And they decided they had best part ways, because he was not any use to them, and they were certainly no use to him. So he was offered an organist job at Mühlhausen, and again he said, this is good. This is I'm the chief guy, small town, but it'll be a good living. They offered him much more money, and at that time he was courting his cousin Maria Barbara, and they wanted to get married. So with the Mühlhausen job, he had enough money to support a wife and possibly a family. So they moved. They married in early or mid-December. It had to be midweek at home, because the musicians had to be recovered from their hangovers in time to play on Sunday. Because Bach spent 2 months of his salary on wine to celebrate the wedding. So goes to Mühlhausen, marries Maria Barbara, and they start their family. And that only lasts less than a year. Again, because he has no resources. He wants to make a beautiful church music with voices and organ and instruments, and there's no instruments and there's no staff for him to work with. So in spite of the better salary and being the top guy, it's no good. So when he leaves the town council, he wrote them a famous letter saying, this is why, besides and he creates a statement, like, if you will, it's a work statement, that the only reason for music is the glorification of God and the refreshment of the Spirit. And he wants to make a well-ordered and noble church music, and he can't do it in Mühlhausen because there's just no resources, no voices, there's no instrumentalists, no nothing. So he got an offer to go to Weimar. And this is his first job that is not a church organ job. The prince was very impressed with his organ playing and wanted to have him as his personal court organist, as kind of a trophy musician to add to his court. So he went, and he thought, well, this is going to be great. They're offering me more money. There's no church board involved. I only have to write 1 cantata a month, and I have other musicians, good musicians, to work with in this court orchestra. So he went there, but there were 2 bosses. The problem was there was a co-regent. There were these 2 dukes, and the old duke felt like he owned all the musicians, and he called the shots of when they could play and who they could play with. And the younger one, the musicians had to get permission to play any side gigs from the old duke. And therein started some problems. And eventually it became so contentious, Bach wanted to leave. And he was insulted because he was the bottom of the totem pole in this place. There was a father and son who were Kapellmeister and the assistant. And Bach just assumed that when the father died, which he did in a year or 2 after he arrived there, that he would be promoted to be Kapellmeister. But he wasn't. The son, who's a mediocre nothing, was automatically promoted into the father's post. And Bach did not like this. And just coincidentally, about that same time, he had been invited to play for a wedding where the Prince of Curtin had attended and heard him play and thought, ooh, I want him in my court orchestra. So he offered him a 77% raise in salary plus a place to live, and he could get out of there. And so he arranged it to move to Curtin, but he didn't ask for permission to leave Weimar first. So asking for permission is dangerous. The old Duke was tremendously offended and slammed him in jail for a month as punishment for his daring to act, to leave, because he was jealous also. He didn't want Prince Leopold of Curtin to have his trophy organist. And that's where we find Bach contemplating writing the Well-Tempered Clavier. I have some photos. Here's Arnstadt. That's the church, and that's the inside, and that's the square where this terrible incident of the fight in the night happened. I think in the next slide I have a night shot. Same area. There we are, with a typical short sword. There's old Arnstadt. He was in the number 3 church in the town. It wasn't even the number 1 church. And now there's a modern day statue of Bach, purporting to be Bach, looking very insolent in the town square. And there is Buxtehude playing with another very famous organist, Reichen, who is from Hamburg. And these two were giants, and Bach admired both of them. Mühlhausen, very pretty little church. They've renamed the church as a Bach church now, and they have a Bach festival, and everything is devoted to Bach, but he was there less than 1 year. There's the Dukes, the old Duke on the left, who felt like he owned these musicians. They were his property. It was almost medieval. And there's the young nephew who caused some problems. When a horn player asked to leave, he was flogged 100 times and told no. And then he asked to leave again, I guess after he'd recovered, and they flogged him again before they kicked him out. And then the Duke hung him in effigy in the palace courtyard as a warning to other musicians. It's like medieval peasants and masters. Really frightening attitude these guys had toward their musician employees. There's the Wilhelmsburg Palace in Weimar. This is where Bach thought, this is going to be wonderful. There's no church. I can go and make court music with all these fine musicians. It burned down eventually. And now the only thing left is the tower and the gatehouse, which you'll see at the left of the image. There's a moat and a little bridge that goes through the gatehouse. And we believe that was what the county judge used as a jail. This was the place where Bach played the organ inside the Wilhelm's palace. It burned down, but he had this fantastic organ way up at the top. It was like 65 feet above the floor in this high loft, and sounded like the music was wafting down from heaven. And it was crowded up there, but you could get singers and a few instrumentalists up there, and Bach played from that place. So this is a recreation using digital technology of where Bach played. When he left, there are no cantatas, because we think the Duke said, what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. It's not your intellectual property, it's my property. So all the manuscripts were left locked up in the archives of this building, which then subsequently burned down. So we don't have anything. There's the gatehouse where he was in jail. I don't think he even had pen and paper when he was locked up in this place. He just was working in his mind. It was like being in, solitary confinement for a month in this terrible cold place. Okay, so then he left. The day after they let him out, he left town. Marchand. This is the famous keyboard duel between Marchand and Bach. And this was just before he decided to quit the job at Weimar. Marchand was a famous French organist who was the employee of Louis XIV. I don't know why he was so famous. He had to leave Paris and go on this tour of Germany because his wife had just been granted a divorce by Louis XIV because he beat her. And so he was granted the divorce and given 2,000 livres from Marchand's salary as compensation. So he just left, went on this tour of Germany, and there was to be a contest in Dresden arranged by the music director there. And music director was a little nervous about Marchand moving in on his territory because in Dresden they liked the French style. They liked French musicians and French culture. So it's thought the music director in Dresden invited Bach and set up this contest of a duel, so-called duel between the two of them. This is quite a distance for Bach to travel. And the incentive was the 500 thaler. I don't know what that is in today's dollars, but it was a significant cash prize to be given to the winner. So Bach goes, and he listens to Marchand from a side room or behind a curtain or somewhere. He spies on him. And we think Marchand was given the same opportunity to listen to Bach warming up on the organ. And what happened was Marchand left town at dawn the day of the contest. I'm out of here. So poor Bach shows up, confident that he's going to win this contest and the money and maybe a job offer in Dresden because things are getting a little tiresome down in Weimar. And what he finds is the money's gone. Somebody embezzled the money. It's disappeared, but yet he has to perform. They expect something. So he puts on quite a show for them, improvising. And Marchand, I think, did the right thing to leave town because I have a fugue. In my entire library, this is all I could find of his. There's not much music in print. I think I know why. Here's a little fugue in G minor by Marchand. I don't know if I'll make it through to the end. You'll see. He was right to be embarrassed. Leave town. That's just, it's so pathetic compared to Bach. Okay, so now what happened was really terrible at this time. Bach left after being in jail for an entire month in November. I mean, it really had to be terrible and cold, practically the whole month of November. Released December 1st or 2nd, and then the next day they left town. He had a wife and 4 young children at home when the Duke did this to him. It's just so cruel, so excessive. So they make the move to Curtin, and he has a huge salary and a signing bonus, and he has musicians. There's the Curtin Palace. I found this little 18th century engraving of kind of the same outline of this big rectangle courtyard in the middle, and then cultivated fields and gardens all around it, orchards and gardens. And Prince Leopold was very musical. He was interested in musical. He played keyboard and violin, and he sponsored Bach. He wanted to have splendid music and have the best court musicians in that area. And he participated himself. He would often join in. This is the time when Bach stopped writing church music. There are no cantatas, and he wrote all the great instrumental music, the 6 Brandenburg concertos, the 6 French suites, the 6 violin sonatas, the 6 sonatas for viola da gamba, the 6 partitas. Why is everything 6 and 6 and 6? 6 was a sacred number. That's the days of creation, right? 6 days of work and then rest on the 7th. I think that's why everything is in sets of 6 in this place. And it was so productive. And he said that was the happiest time of his life, working with these very fine musicians and creating a whole body of instrumental music that was thrilling for him. Then disaster struck. They had a child born. They named him Leopold, and Prince Leopold was the godfather. It was a boy who died 10 months later. And then, next slide, in the summer, Prince Leopold liked to take a whole bunch of his musicians to Carlsbad. It was about 130 miles to the south. It's a spa town. And one writer says this is essentially the first summer music festival. He took all these fine people and they played concerts. He had to have live music and he liked to play live music. So he couldn't be without it for the 2 or 3 or 4 months that he would go to Carlsbad. But what happened was Bach's wife, Maria Barbara, became ill with a fever and died very quickly and was buried on July 7th while he was still here in Carlsbad. And someone tried to send a message to notify him that she was gravely ill. And whoever the lackey was, the courtier, they said, best not to disturb the prince. He can't be without his summer music and we don't want to create a fuss, create a disturbance here. So better not to say anything and he can deal with it when he gets home. So Bach had no idea. And he gets home, he finds out that she's dead and buried when he comes home and opens the door, and his 6-year-old son, Carl Philipp Emanuel, tells him. And those children are now without a mother. And he's a single dad with all these kids, 4 kids. So he immediately starts thinking about the future. And soon after, Prince Leopold married a woman who didn't like music and thought it was very improper for him to participate. So it's just, you don't do that. You don't mix with those low-life musicians. It's not seemly. It's not proper. So she discouraged him from playing, and she had no interest in the music. So Bach could see the handwriting on the wall, and that's when he looked around for the next job and how he ended up in Leipzig, because it was a university town. There would be an education for his boys, and they could go to the Thomas School, and he would be in charge. He'd be the music director, of St. Thomas. Next image. This is a kind of a sentimental engraving, supposedly, of Maria Barbara with her children and Bach at the keyboard. There is now a stone in the place where they think she was buried. I don't think anybody really knows. There in Curtin, in the old cemetery. They had 7 children together. There were twins who died, and then Leopold died. So there were the 4 survivors were an oldest daughter, Wilhelm Friedemann, who he wrote the notebook for, and Carl Philipp Emanuel, and Johann Gottfried. So those 4 children needed a mom, and he had to find someone quick. Anna Magdalena enters the picture about a year later. But meanwhile, he's dealing with grief. And it is thought that 2 of these preludes and fugues from the Well-Tempered Clavier might possibly be from the time when he was grieving for Maria Barbara. The E-flat minor is stunningly beautiful. It's an aria full of grief and all the stages of grief: anger, grief, and then resignation, pathos. And the fugue is so beautiful and so sad. It's this full of resignation. It is the saddest thing. So first, first I call it the aria, the prelude in E flat minor, and then the fugue. And I believe these are in the context of the death of Maria Barbara. I hope you could hear some of the devices he used there, the augmentation and the 1.5 times the theme against the original theme against 1.5 against the augmentation. He puts it first in the bass and then in the treble. It's amazing. How's our time? Oh, we're almost out of time. We have to I've done it again, haven't I? Too many stories. I have F major. Um, I'll leave you. Let's see. We'll try to get F major, F minor in today. See if I can do it. These are sparkling, especially the F major. Let's do in reverse order. We'll do the minor one first. This is another sad one, and then the F major to send you out on a burst of sunshine. Okay. So beautiful prelude in F minor. It's another one of the great ones, really, really great ones. Michelle, do I have time to do a quick prelude and fugue?
You sure do. Thank you, Melinda.
These are short. These are short and quick and lively, both of them, and they're full of life. They just bubble with life and positive energy. Oh man, thank you for letting me finish. We got through 6 more pairs. Yay. Next week, F sharp, G, and A flat G sharp minor. Action packed, I promise.